Come on, I murmured, as we moved into the dead trees. The forest appeared to cover only a square mile or so. Not that far of a walk to the center, right? As we slowly walked along the trail, the normal Hoofington gloom was cut down to a hazy twilight. In the distance, there were crunches and pops and a strange growl. "How much is red, Scotch?" "Everything?" she muttered softly. "Everything's red." And from the slow tick of radiation, unhealthy too. The trees cut across the road. The branches didn't just intertwine, they looked as if they'd been stabbed right through one another, splitting the trunks and branches of their neighbors. Any gap between them was occupied by the twisting brambles that corkscrewed their way right into the trunks. I heard a wooden groan and saw something move in the distance. "These trees are dead, right?" I asked as I looked at the leafless branches. From the way they curled up, it was almost as though they'd be ready to stab us. "Well, they appear, they," Glory stammered as she stared at one trunk. "I think so?" "Well, if there would, then they'll burn," P21 said. He pulled out an apple with a red band, tugged out the stem, and tossed it onto the trees, blocking our path. There was a loud whoosh, and then a 10-foot path of tree burst into flame. The wood popped and crackled and smoldered, smoked, not much else. The smoke blew back in our faces, the gray cloud stinging my throat fiercely. The woods around us crackled even more loudly. Then I saw one of the thick branches above me slowly turn. It pointed its jagged tip right at P21. "Look out!" I shouted, as the entire branch stabbed down, and only my warning and his agile hooves kept him from getting speared. Another chorus of creaks erupted as the trees stabbed hoof-thick branches at us. Lacuna was able to deflect one with her shield and teleport a few feet out of the path of another. Glory leapt in time to avoid being skewered by one shooting in from the side, landing nearly on the still quivering branch. Scotch held on for dear life as I made a zebra and reared on my back legs, barely deflecting one branch with my forelegs. Rampage's armor rang like a bell as she was knocked off her hooves by an impact. As abruptly as it had started, the attack stopped. We were frozen with a dozen branches all around us. Touching them didn't provoke any kind of response, thank goodness. We looked at one another. Right. No trying to burn the nice not dead trees. If you could even call these things trees. Since we couldn't follow the road, we had to squeeze through the gaps between the splintered trunks. More than once, Lacuna had to teleport through. Twice, Rampage had to hook her hoof claws into the hard, waxy bark and force a gap wide enough to pass through. The trees had other peculiarities, strange cysts and growths that stuck out a sickly green and yellow light. I accidentally brushed against one, and it had popped, spurting a foul fluid that smoked on contact with my foreleg and blackened the enamel. Wow. Out of all the places in the hoof, we'd found the suckiest. From the depths of the woods came a long, low howl that made my mane crawl. There were also rusted drums all over the place. Most had split open long ago, but more than a few were still oozing rainbow-colored gunk. We tried to avoid any tree that had the rainbow gunk on it. Seemed to create even larger and more bizarre versions of the strange leafless plants. One actually appeared to have slices of cake hanging from the ends of its limbs. From the number of waxy and warped bones lying at the base of the tree, I suspected that the cake was a lie. "How'd they even get this far?" P21 muttered in confusion. "I don't know," I said just as quietly. We looked at each other as the creaking forest around us, as creepily, jumped up another notch. No pony wanted to speculate very much on how they'd gotten just far enough to die. We reached a track of sorts, running back along a retaining wall that, while buckled, still provided chunks of concrete above a leafless bramble. Suddenly, there was a crackle overhead, and it stared in shock as a lumpy, rainbow-colored apple appeared on the branch of a tree overhead. More crackles and flashes signaled the appearance of dozens more above us. Oh, this can't be good, I muttered as I watched the rainbows start to squirm and glow brightly. Shit, look out! I yelled, then started running as the first apple fell towards me. It hit the ground with an explosive flash and sprayed stinging bits of seeds at us. Lacuna's shield spell blocked 4 detonations, but collapsed as 3 more exploded simultaneously. She screamed as 2 more exploded along her spine, tearing her flesh and singeing her wings and tail. Rampage, her armor blackened, leaped upon the alicorn's back and started to swipe at the falling apples. Any injuries the detonations gave her started to heal almost immediately, allowing Lacuna to recover enough to restore her shield. Then, as abruptly as they appeared, the exploding apples vanished. Once more, the trees resumed their slow groaning and popping noises. I stared as I saw one trunk split in 2 by the branch of the larger tree, the smaller tree being torn apart. I really hated this place. We let Lacuna heal herself and then tend to us, and suddenly Glory screamed. A gray wooden shoot was growing out of her foreleg. Scotch wasted no time jumping off me and racing to where it was sprouting. She bit down, set her forelegs, and pulled as hard as she could. There was a horrible wet noise as the bloody seed was ripped out. As she spat it aside, I watched in sick horror as another waxy tree began to grow before our eyes in the dirt beside us. P21 and Scotch also had pieces of apple seed, shrapnel, that had to be dug out as they started to sprout. Lacuna had the easiest time. Though she'd been hit by more seeds than any of us, none of them were sprouting. Maybe it was the radiation. Or just more of her freaky alicorn cheating powers. What kind of apples appear from nowhere and then blow up? Scotch asked after yanking the last sprout out of her flank. Goofington apples, I muttered as I glared at the tangling mess of wood and tree. After healing the gouges left by the ripped-out seeds, we set off again. If it hadn't been for Scotch pointing out north and Glory's sharp eyes spotting the steeple of a building through the gloom, I'd have no idea where we were headed. We passed several rusted wagons that made Scotch tape cringe, and even I balked at the sight of the twisted, rusted metal and grotesque plant life growing amid the toxic sludge. The splintering trunks resembled gaping maws, and for all I knew, they were mouths. There's so much red. Everywhere I look is red, Glory whispered as she looked around. Don't focus on the red bars. Keep your eyes open for anything else, I murmured as I kicked an ugly log with my rear hoof. The log's eyes opened, and it lunged, biting my ass hard and driving splintering fangs deep into my haunch. It snarled like some sort of maddened canine. It was a good thing that my hide was tougher than the usual mare's, otherwise it probably would have torn my flank clean off. Another of the things tore itself off a gnarled tree and leapt at Glory, while a third sprang from a thicket at P21. Glory turned, pointed her gun undearingly at the plunging log, and unloaded a stream of energy that transformed the entire beast into a flaming torch. It slammed to the gray Pegasus, but she kicked it away before it could do any more than singe her barding. Then there was a loud crackle as 4 tree limbs speared out at once, and crashed the flaming wolf log into pieces. As smoothly as he wore his pip-buck, P22 brought Persuasion up to his jaw and fired a clean 44mm grenade right into the gaping maw of one of the wolves bearing down on him. As it slammed into him, he rolled smoothly on his back and kicked it way over his head. The wooden creatures scrambled up, and then the grenade exploded and blew the snarling head into so many toothpicks. One burst, half buried from the ground, and sunk its fangs into Lacuna's belly, tearing a jagged wound. Alicorns could bleed just like any pony else, and they could scream too. As the wolf log readied its second bite, Rampage launched itself underneath the purple unicorn and grabbed the beast. Its jagged edges tore at her striped hide, but she kept bending until the log split in two. As for me, I was in a bit of a predicament, as the one attached to my ass was doing everything it could to tear said area off, and was about to accomplish exactly that. I drew vigilance, but with the monster already directly behind me, I couldn't draw a bead on it. I spat vigilance into the air. "Scotch!" I yelled, and the perceptive girl spotted the weapon and caught it in her hooves. I aimed right at my butt and shouted, "Sats!" She snorted and sent 3 bullets into its head, blowing it into pulpy pieces of wood. Lacuna groaned as she fell over, giving us a really good look at the grievous bite on her gut. Glory raced over and P21 fished out a healing potion. "Hold still. Let me get your insides inside. And if you hold still," Scotch chuckled, "I'll get the splinters out of your butt." She bit the largest and tugged it free. I winced, closing my eyes as it was yanked out and spat aside. "Funny. I would have expected Glory to be the one with a stick up her." "Just pull him out, please, Scotch," I groaned. I'd have to wait to regenerate, like Rampage. More healing potions for the rest of my friends. "We're going in circles," Rampage declared. It'd been more than an hour, and we've been bombed nearly once more, nearly speared when I tried incendiary bullets, and suffered 2 more attacks by the timber wolves. We'd encountered other weirdness too, like a tree that dropped branches that cried rainbow gunk, and was it a pine tree? Covered in steel pins. One tree looked perfectly fine and leafy, but made P21 violently ill when we approached. Another had watched us with dozens of eyes that looked oddly like P21's. Weird. Glory came across an apple tree, but at her approach, the luscious red apples revealed themselves to be red monsters that scuttled after us, snapping pincers. Then there were some thorny branches that barely scratched Scotch, but when she started bleeding, she didn't stop. The filly's blood had soaked my pack before Lacuna could administer healing spells. I might have hated the hoof in general, but I really loathed this place. Rampage was pointing at some splatters of blood in the dirt. "Unless we're not the only ponies dumb in this place, we've been here before." "We can't. We've been going north pretty consistently," Glory said as she looked over at the spire. "But there was that time when we had to double back, and then that we went southeast for that time, and... Have we been here before?" "We have," P21 confirmed gravely. He picked up one of my shotgun husks in his mouth and passed it to me. 12-gauge explosive. That's what you've been using on those wolf things, right?" It was. They didn't have any vitals per se, you just had to blast them apart. I looked around, spotted the remains of one timberwolf, and scowled. "I remember this place, but there was a gap to the north," I said as I pointed at the solid barrier. "It was the thorny one that got Scotch scratched up." "It appears as though this maze is cheating," Lacuna observed softly. The Alicorn was clearly exhausted. Being the largest, she'd received more attacks than any of the rest of us. "And the trees are moving to keep us trapped." "Are you telling me these things are intelligent?" Rampage asked as she pointed a hoof at the trunks. "Perhaps in a feral, primitive sense? It would explain their cat and mouse antics," Glory said as she glared at a twisted piece of wood.